Nous allons commencer.
We are going to start.
Hello, everyone. Bonjour tout le monde. I call this meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 121 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on the Status of Women. Before we begin, I would like to ask that all in-person participants read the guidelines written on the updated cards on the table. These measures are in place, indeed, to help prevent audio and feedback incidences and to protect the health and safety of all participants, including the interpreters. I'd also like to remind all members of the following points. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. All comments should please be addressed through the chair. And members, please raise your hand if you wish to speak, whether participating in person or in Zoom. I would also like to acknowledge our regret for the meeting starting a little bit tardy, out of our control, and I would also like to extend that regret to our witnesses that have been extraordinarily patient while we have been in the House, and also to those that are online watching. As a reminder to all, we do have a short 15-minute segment at the end of today's meeting to go over the subcommittee's report and a couple of other administrative items. So we will close off with witnesses with about 15 minutes remaining so that we can go into camera for that. Pursuant to standing... Wait.
I don't know if I'm having the issues, but the sound, I'm not hearing almost nothing. It's not working for me. I think we have the same problem. I think we're having the same problem as we did the other day.
I will continue to speak for a minute in English and see how the translation is. Lisa?
You might want to just to advise our witnesses that we still have another vote that may interrupt our meeting, just so they're aware and not surprised if we break again in the middle of our testimony.
No, I appreciate the heads up. So what Lisa did acknowledge is that there is potential that there may be another vote in approximately 30 minutes, but at this point we don't know, so we're going to carry on until the time, indeed, the bells, if they do start to ring, then we'll deal with it at that time. There is feedback, so I don't know if anybody else is hearing it. I think moving forward, what I will do, you're good? Okay, so if I'm speaking, I'm just going to take my earpiece out so I don't hear myself, but if I need translation, I'll put it back on. Okay, so pursuant to Standing Order 1082, and the motion adopted by the committee on Monday, November 27th, 2023. The committee is continuing with its study of coercive behavior. Before I welcome all the witnesses, I would like to provide a trigger warning. We will be discussing experiences related to violence and coercive control. This may be triggering to viewers with similar experiences. If indeed you feel distressed or need help, please advise the clerk. For all witnesses and for members of Parliament, it is very important that we recognize that these are very difficult discussions. So let's try and be as compassionate as we can with our conversations. At this point, I would like to welcome from the Canadian Centre for Women's Empowerment. In the room, we have Meseret Hailiesis, founder and executive director. By video conference, we have the following witnesses: Horizon Women's Centre, Linda Lafontaine, Renault, Executive Director. From Jury Pop, we have Sophie Gagnon, Executive Director, and Justine Fortin, Director of Legal Services. We also have from Peel Regional Police, Neil Mlinovich, Deputy Chief of Police. We have Persons Against Non-State Torture, Linda McDonald, co-founder, and Jeanne Sarson, co-founder. We also have Toba Center for Children and Youth, Christy Diskovich, Chief Executive Officer. We will hear up to 5-minute opening statements from each organization represented here today, and the opening statements will then be followed by rounds of questions from all members. Yes, all witnesses that are online are here, and we will be doing one panel this afternoon. We don't see them online. So what I'll do is, at this point, let's welcome Ms. Meseret Jesus for the 5 minutes. And while we're hearing you, they can be sorting out the other witnesses so that we're able to see them online. So please go ahead with your up to 5 minutes opening remarks.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Meseret Haile Jesus, the founder and the executive director of the Canadian Centre for Women Empowerment. We are the only Canadian non-for-profit organization that focuses addressing all forms of economic abuse and injustice for survivors through system change research and advocacy. We appreciate being included in this important conversation on coercive behavior. We know things are changing quickly, but speaking not only as a founder and executive director, having much time as possible to prepare for this appearance, allow us not only to prepare our knowledge, but for our mental health. CCFWE generally agree with the finding of the reports of the Standing Committee on the Justice and Human Rights in 2021 that criminalize coercive control could contribute to earlier prevention and intervention of intimate partner violence. However, we doubt that an offense alone can achieve a desired outcome. Dear members, as you may know, many Indigenous and racialized and other marginalized victims, they don't report less hidden form of abuse and violence to the police because the previous problematic and traumatizing experience with the law enforcement. So while this proposal may help, it leaves many without the solution while potentially adding it. Report from Australia on criminalization of coercive behavior shows an increase misidentifying Aboriginal women as aggressor due to the systemic racism among police and court system. Shockingly, the Queensland Domestic and Family Violence Days Review found that almost half of all Aboriginal women killed by intimate partner violence were previously wrongly identified by police as aggressor instead of their abusive partner when reporting violence. As a Black woman and survivor-led organization, we strongly recommend that the federal government takes survivor-centered approach to any potential coercive control offense and let survivors with different intersectional reality, such as newcomers, immigrant, gender diverse people, Indigenous, racialized, disabled, seniors, and young women. I respectfully urge this standing committee to recommend a trauma-informed, anti-oppressive, and feminist lens to any legislator to coercive control if its goal to validate victims' experience. The offense must be based on the notion that domestic violence and coercive control are rooted in gender inequalities and predominantly committed by men against women. Dear member, economic abuse is a very common but often overlooked form of domestic abuse, and it's part of coercive controlling behavior by an abuser to restrict victim financial independence through economic control, employment sabotage, and economic exploitation. Lack of access to finance is a common and main reason why victims stay in abusive relationship or return to them. They cannot afford to leave. There is also long-lasting impact as economic abuse follows victims through poor credit scores, debt, and financial impact. Our organization research also conducted in Ottawa region in 2021 highlighted that 95% of victims experience economic abuse, which is similar finding from United States, Australia, and United Kingdom. In addition to that, 86% of victims were demanding to quit their work, 93% of women, their abuser didn't allow them to have their own money and have taken away paycheck and financial aid. 90% of victims had a decision-making power taken from their abusers, and 90% of abusers threatened by physical harm if the abuser or the victim paid rent and other bills, and 84% of abusers had dates built under the victim name. This report tactics serves as a crucial indicator for coercing control behavior, and it must be included in any legal and policy measures. To raise awareness of this often hidden type of coercive control, CCFWE recommended that the federal government must declare November 26 as a National Awareness Day. CCFWE believes that the criminal justice system should be the last mode of intervention. It doesn't address a systemic issue that prevents women from happening or prevent victim living abuse. Therefore, systemic change is needed before we criminalize coercive control. We urge the federal government to show its commitment to ending gender-based violence and validate survivors' experience by adequate funding social services, provide additional shelters and affordable housing, increase access to legal aid, invest on ongoing training and awareness-raising campaigns on the sign and the nature of coercive control behavior, collect aggregated data on various forms of coercive control, including economic abuse. Once again, I would like to thank the committee members for the opportunity to speak this important topic. I also want to congratulate Madam Chair on your new appointment for this role, and we look forward to work together.
Madame la Présidente, point d'ordre, il n'y avait plus de traduction.
For a little bit while we see if the translation is working. I would like to acknowledge thanks to Meseret for attending and sharing your testimony. Is the translation starting to work just fine? Okay, terrific. Okay, thank you very much. Next, I would like to welcome Ms. Linda Lafontaise-Renault. You have up to 5 minutes. Thank you. Linda, you are currently muted. If you want to, that's okay. We'll start the 5 minutes now. Thank you.
Sorry about that. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. I would first like to thank the committee for allowing me this opportunity today. My name is Linda Lafontaise-Renault. I am the Executive Director of the Horizon Women's Centre, Centre Horizon pour Femmes in Sturgeon Falls, Ontario. We are the only fully bilingual shelter in our region that offers Francophone services 24 hours a day. Our services include a 10-bed emergency shelter, outreach, and transitional housing program, and we are very unique in the fact that we offer in-house trauma-based therapy to women in our community in both official language that have been survivors of partner violence. I have worked at this agency for 34 years, and I have firsthand seen the detrimental effects that abuse has on women and their children. But I have also seen many women and their children be able to live a life that they truly deserve. Our work in violence against women's agencies can be very difficult, dangerous, and also discouraging, but it can also be the most rewarding at the same time. Most women are now struggling to find affordable housing since COVID, and they are now facing living in shelters a lot longer and long waiting times for social housing, even when they are approved for abuse priority by the Housing Authority. In our district, women have abuse priority. They are now have a waiting time well over 1 to 2 years, and this contradicts the reason for instilling this abuse priority in the first place. The reality is that women and children are now finding accommodations that are not the safest but most affordable to them, and are now returning to their partners. I have noticed through my experience that more than often, some women do not realize the danger that they are in. I believe we need more public awareness campaigns and on coercive abuse so that women can escape these types of abusers earlier, and also for women to see the warning signs. Most time, the abuse escalates from emotional to physical abuse and even threatening or killing their partner and including their children when the abuser realizes she is leaving. Women are often arrive at our shelter that are truly broken. Many women have a hard time
Point of order,
expressing.
Madam Speaker. My apologies to the witness, but I'm having trouble hearing with the headphone and I'm a bit hard of hearing, and I'm wondering if we can turn up the volume in the room so that I can hear it.
If we could try and have the volume turned up in the room. And
Sorry.
make sure that no one,
Okay.
please make
I'm
sure that
getting
no
old
other
and
microphones
I'm not
are.
afraid to admit it. Sorry.
To be honest,
Pardon?
I think this place has deafened a lot of us.
Okay, so at this
Okay.
point, we'll go back to the witness, and I'll just ask everyone to turn off their mics if they're not speaking, and we'll carry on. And Linda, obviously, the last 30 seconds or so, you'll get back. Go ahead.
Thank you so much. So women often arrive at our shelter feeling truly broken. Many women have a hard time expressing their needs and wants because most of them have been dictated to what these should be by their abusers. We see mothers struggling with their children who are mimicking what they have witnessed So we are faced at times with children that are physically and verbally abusive towards their mothers. The effect on children can oftentimes be seen when children of past residents are now seeking our services as adults because they are now victims themselves of partner violence. Sorry. Oh, I missed. So it's imperative that we work diligently to offer the most empathetic, supportive, and empowering experience and help them in being able to realize that they have the right to be free from abuse. 44% of women who have been in an intimate relationship experience abuse through Statistics Canada report in 2008. This does not shed light on how many women and children have been victims of sexual luring or trafficking, and those that have not come forward or pressed charges due to fear of repercussions. The amount of control that one single person can gain over another person is unimaginable to many, and there is no time limit to heal from the extreme trauma, effects, and even dehumanization that they have lived through. I will quote one woman's words that she stated to me. It's not the physical and sexual abuse that he put me through that traumatically impacted my life. It's the 13 years of mental, emotional, and financial abuse. Abusers need to be held accountable, and some ex-partners have such a high need to control that we are now seeing women, mothers most, being put through the most cruel type of abuse, and it's being done through their children. Some children are being coerced and influenced negatively by the abuser to refuse visitations with their mothers, and partners are refusing visitation rights to their ex-partners because they know that police will not get involved, as most custody orders do not have police enforcement clauses. And this leads to mothers not being able to see their children for months and having long delays in the judicial system. The abusers are now utilizing parental alienation to their advantage. Our work in violence against women is critical in protecting women and the children and children's lives. My recommendations are as follows: increased annual funding to violence against women's shelters and agencies to reflect the actual cost of living. That coercive control be recognized in the criminal code, that we fund public awareness campaigns on coercive abuse, what it is and how it affects women and children. And I would also suggest consultations with Pamela Cross, who is a Canadian feminist lawyer and a women's advocate, as I believe it could be instrumental in effectively describing coercive abuse in legal terms and advising the committee on potential underlying or detrimental actions that can be used against women. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Next, I would like to welcome Ms. Sophie Gagnon and Justine Fortin. You have up to 5 minutes.
Madame la Présidente, membres du comité.
Madam Chair, committee members, hello. Thank you for this opportunity to speak today on this issue. GRPOP is an organization whose mission is to improve access to justice for vulnerable people, and we've been working for several years with women who are victims of domestic violence. In particular, we support these people in their family law-related legal proceedings, so whether it's for child custody, separation, or protective measures. And one constant among the victims we represent is the presence of coercive control in their experience of domestic violence. So we know that there's been a focus recently on the criminalization. So we'd like to draw your attention to something that we find, that we would like to draw your attention to the impact of coercive control in family law. So almost on a daily basis, we see that this coercive control is poorly understood, and that this lack of understanding has real and significant consequences for the victims. Too often, the women we represent are re-victimized through judicial decisions that fail to take into account the power dynamics exerted through coercive control. So, for example, certain types of decision, and we'll give you one example. Shared custody is one example. So this can seem like a common occurrence, but in the situation of coercive control, this order will allow the violent parent to keep control over the parent and the child. The violent parent will use this as a way to continue exercise. So by refusing to cooperate on education, health, activity decisions, by requiring the victim to stay in contact with them and negotiating every aspect of daily life. The aggressor will also use parental time to interrogate children about the what the other parent is doing. And so children, them too, are victims here. We also need, it's also important to understand that when it comes to the safety and psychological safety, this is often rejected by courts because courts still have a very poor understanding of coercive control. And so we're talking about orders such as the presence of a worker during a discovery. So all of these situations are forces our lawyers to expend considerable effort educating the court about coercive control, its definition, forms, and consequences. And the result is a heavy legal and emotional workload, which could be alleviated if better knowledge of the phenomena were built into the judicial system from the outset. So that is why we firmly believe that legislative reforms are needed at the federal level, notably through the Divorce Act. We recommend the explicit inclusion of coercion control in the factors that judges must take into account when making decisions about child custody and separation. And this recognition in the law would better protect victims, including children, from the pernicious effects of this form of violence. We also recommend that the training of new judges include a component on coercive control. The current lack of training creates major gaps in the appreciation of situations experienced by victims, often making it impossible to take this reality into account in judicial decisions. So in conclusion, the inclusion of coercive control in criminal law is an important step. I think we need to go further by reflecting on family law as well. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Next, we have Mr. Nick Milinovich. You have up to 5 minutes.
Good afternoon, and thank you. My name is Nick Milinovich, and I'm the Deputy Chief of Investigative and Emergency Services Command at Peel Regional Police. I'd like to start by thanking the Chair and members of the Standing Committee on the Status of Women for inviting us to participate today. I would also like to thank all of the witnesses for sharing their perspectives and their stories. For those unfamiliar with Peel Regional Police, we are the third largest municipal police service in Canada, serving communities of Mississauga and Brampton as part of Peel Region. Peel Region is one of the most diverse communities in the country, with over 1.7 million residents. It is also home to one of the largest international airports in North America, Pearson Airport. Our community is also one of the largest transitory hubs in North America, with billions of dollars of goods transported through our region daily. Because of this, issues like intimate partner violence and human trafficking and gender-based violence collectively are a concern for our community and also prioritized as a priority by our police service through enforcement and prevention, and making some of the largest investments in those spaces that any police service has in Canada. We have specialized human trafficking investigators that are comprised of our Vice unit and are one of the only services delivering specialized training for all of our frontline officers to enhance capabilities in identifying, preventing, and safely intercepting incidents with the victim's well-being and support as the main priority. Our Vice team further works with local colleges, community organizations, and law enforcement agencies, including Pearson Airport, to effectively monitor, stop, and intervene in human trafficking across our region, across the province and country. In the last 5 years, our Vice unit have charged over 150 people with human trafficking related offenses. Another primary focus of our police service is intimate partner violence. In 2023, our officers responded to over 9,000 500 incidents of family and intimate partner violence. That is the equivalent of almost 26 unique incidents a day. And I'm going to pause here and ask the committee and everybody that's participating and watching today, 26 unique incidents per day. Now imagine all of the family members, the community, and the reverberating impacts of that 26 per day. And then you begin to understand the scope of this issue. As I said, we laid 9,540 charges, and the top 5 charges were assault, uttering threats, failure to comply with release orders or conditions of release, assault with a weapon, and choking, suffocating, or strangulation. Our data shows that roughly 1 woman a day in Peel is strangled by her partner. From January 1st to August 31st, we had 297 strangulation occurrences. Of the 15 homicides that we've had this year, 3 or 20% of those have been femicides. These are just the incidents that are reported. As everybody here participating today, and as the witnesses would know, and certainly police would know, a greater number of incidents are occurring and continuing to be unreported. At Peel, we have taken a survivor-centric approach to gender-based violence, inclusive of intimate partners violence and human trafficking. These are tragic, unacceptable incidents that carry unimaginable trauma for victims, survivors, and those are victims and survivors who are predominantly women and girls and disproportionately impacts racialized women and girls, as well as members of our LGBTIAQA+ community and members and persons and people with disabilities. Each of these incidents is representative of the vulnerabilities that we are seeing in our current system and the need to prioritize survivors in the systems that we ask them to rely on for protection. In Peel, we have integrated our intimate partner violence unit with a variety of specialized trained officers within the Safe Center of Peel, members of which I believe the committee has heard testimony from before. It collaborates with our community, 24 community partners who provide wraparound and integrated services and supports in one centralized location. This ensures that victims and survivors are receiving the help they need for themselves and for their families. In April 22, the joint deputation of our police service and Safe Center of Peel also provided information to this committee on your study of intimate partner and domestic violence. It included a series of recommendations to address the gaps in the current system that were barriers and were also creating risks for victims or survivors. Presently, violence in family and criminal law is narrowly defined
Excuse me, Nick.
Yes.
Sorry to interrupt. If I could have you wrap up in the next 10 or 15 seconds, and then if you have anything that you're missing, try and include it in any of the questions that you get posed. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. In conclusion, it is incumbent upon all of us as a community that really cares, to ensure that the right measures and safeguards are in place where survivors can feel safe and supported to remove themselves from these types of environments. Currently, there are gaps, and there are reasons that legitimately concern survivors about coming forward, and we need to begin addressing those. Thank you again for inviting the Peel Regional Police to appear before the committee, and of course, I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you for that. At this point, I would like to welcome Ms. Linda McDonald and Jeanne Sarson. You have up to 5 minutes.
Thank you. Jean Sarson and I are feminist grassroots activists working in Nova Scotia, in Canada, and globally with 31 years of expertise in supporting women who have been subjected to non-state torture. We are also members of the NGO, the National Council of Women of Canada. Coercive control is often a very large component of non-state torture. Keeping women captive and the coercion of older women is very invisible. As a nurse, I supported a woman in her 80s who had been tortured and trafficked as a young mother with her 2 little boys present by men in a Nova Scotia fishing village where she lived. Escaping this torture, she brought up her family and remarried. After retiring, her second husband began coercing her by taking control of her money, isolating her from her family and friends, making intentional medication errors, dehumanizing her with constant psychological abuse, and terrifying her by claiming she had memory loss. These coercive control tactics triggered her into previous non-state torture flashbacks to the point that she became constantly triggered, losing control of her independence, and eventually having to be placed in long-term care. Coming from Nova Scotia provides our voices extra weight because we were participants in the Mass Casualty Commission inquiry after one man shot and killed 22 people, including 13 women. Earlier this month, the Nova Scotia provincial government passed a bill declaring domestic violence an epidemic in Nova Scotia, which flows from the Mass Casualty Commission's findings about Nova Scotia and Canada. Coercive control is often combined with other forms of male violence against women, intimate partner or domestic violence, and if considered a serious crime, can prevent suicide and fatal crimes such as femicide and even mass shootings. As participants of the Mass Casualty Commission, we heard about the extensive coercion the gunman forced onto his partner, making her terrified to leave him. She was also strangled by him, but this crime was not taken seriously. Jean and I joined with other Nova Scotia feminists, recommending that coercive control become part of the Criminal Code of Canada. And as Persons Against Non-State Torture, we recommended strangulation and femicide as distinct crimes be added to the Criminal Code. We submit these recommendations again today. As Anne Frank said, what is done cannot be undone, but one can prevent it from happening again.
I follow Linda. So further in our brief recommendation, promoting a victim-centered approach relating to children means creating the social legal environment wherein children can speak of the impact non-state torture's coercive control manipulations have on them, on other children, and against animals. Their safety is always threatened, creating never-ending vulnerability as described in Bill C-332. Our brief introduced Carrie, whose father forced her to drown her pet kitten, threatening to drown her if she told of his torture trafficking. Carrie is not alone. Alex's father took her to see baby rabbits. Hugging one, her father then took the rabbit and broke its neck. His message was clear. Alex said she knew never to tell he was torture trafficking her. Alex was 6 years old. The knowledge is these perpetrators inflict coercive control within and outside of their home, and children's victimization can include the harming of animals. Non-state torture's coercive control of their children includes intentionally inflicting no-win victimization ordeals in and out of their home. Hope described, "My father used to blackmail me by forcing me to allow him to orally rape me so my siblings would be fed. What choice did I have?" Carrie described being forced to smear Margaret, another little girl, with perpetrators' body fluids so she would not have to consume their body fluids, saying, "There was no way I could win. The decision left me feeling I had harmed Margaret. I felt so guilty, ashamed, humiliated, and terrified." To end the epidemic of intimate partner violence against women, red flag indicators will be preventive interventions available to children if the torturer's MO of coercive behaviors is understood as involving their exertion of absolute domination, power, and control in and out of their home, inflicting torture, terror, horror, and dehumanization of their children, other children, and the harming of animals, and the possible involvement of organized criminal, torture, trafficking, and formal networks. To Linda's recommendation, I add support of brief C-332 and the criminalization of non-state torture to expose the perpetrator's criminality. Thank you.
Thank you kindly for your testimony. Next, I would like to welcome Ms. Christy Dickowitz. You have up to 5 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you to the committee for providing me the opportunity to speak on such an important topic. My name is Christy Dickowitz, and I'm the Chief Executive Officer of Toba Centre for Children and Youth, a charitable organization and Manitoba's only child advocacy centre. Child advocacy centres are child-friendly spaces in which law enforcement, child protection, prosecution, mental health, medical, and victim advocacy professionals work together to investigate abuse, help children and their families heal from abuse, and hold offenders accountable. The first Child Advocacy Center was established in Huntsville, Alabama in 1985, and the movement has been growing ever since. There are over 900 accredited child advocacy centers in the United States. We have over 40 in Canada, and there are centers in over 20 countries around the world. These centers are recognized around the world as the leading practice in responding to child abuse cases. However, I would suggest we have a long way to go in Canada in supporting these centers and ensuring the best outcomes for children. Before I go further, I'd like to speak directly to the issue of child maltreatment. At our center, we serve children, youth, and their caregivers who experience child sexual abuse, physical abuse, and children who witness IPV and significant violence. There are approximately 200,000 child abuse investigations across Canada each year, and these are only the cases we know about, the ones that are reported. There are significant barriers to reporting, coercive behavior being just one of them. While I speak to issues impacting children, youth, and their caregivers, as it is the focus of my life's work, I'd like to note to the committee that the majority of my comments today also speak directly to the experiences of vulnerable adult populations also impacted by interpersonal violence. Child abuse is anything that intentionally endangers the development, security, or survival of a child, the act of emotionally, physically, or sexually harming a child. To be very clear, coercive behavior is central to almost all of this criminal behavior. A further impact of that coercive behavior and inevitable abuse can be setting children, youth, and adults up for additional challenges in dealing with the criminal justice system. Abusers work very hard to silence their victims, take away their voice, and disempower them. The system set up to respond must understand this and work in a coordinated fashion to ensure that we are meeting the needs of the survivors. Child advocacy centers are designed for this purpose, but in Canada, we do not have any mechanism to enforce internationally recognized standards of practice. In the United States, child advocacy centers must be accredited and prove that they are meeting minimal standards, which include a multidisciplinary response from the point of report, child forensic interviewing standards, inclusivity and diversity standards, victim support, amongst others. At this point in time, it is up to folks like myself to convince partner agencies like law enforcement, child welfare agencies, medical centers, that working together and demanding standards is a good idea. And while I have no doubt that all folks working in this area would say they want to put children first, it is no easy task to change these old, large, and institutionally based systems. It requires a great deal of humility for folks to step back and say we need to work differently and better. All levels of government have tools at their disposal that can and should be used to demand that these standards be met through legislation, professional standards like policing standards, and through funding of child advocacy centers to ensure all children in Canada have access. When considering this testimony on coercive control, I also reflected on how poorly children, youth, and those impacted by interpersonal violence fare in our criminal justice system. I believe that significant reform is both needed and possible. Again, victims in these cases have often been stripped of their voice and their confidence. Our criminal justice system is not set up to consider the needs of these vulnerable populations. Child advocacy centers across Canada are working with their local prosecutors to try and facilitate closed-circuit testimony being offered from their centers. In Calgary and Edmonton, this practice is happening. In each jurisdiction, though, we have to start from the beginning to create precedent and enable this option. When we consider the coercive abuse endured by the victims we work with, we're struck by the horror of asking that child to enter into a room with their abuser and speak their truth in front of their abuser, their families, and strangers, and it seemed inhumane. Psychologist Rachel Zajac has published a great deal of research outlining the failures of the courts to meet the needs of children. She wrote, Recent research has made it clear that cross-examination is unlikely to be the truth-finding technique that many believe it to be. Instead, the style of questioning typically used during this process directly contravenes almost every principle scientifically established over the past 30 years to obtain complete and accurate evidence from any witness, particularly a child. There are countries we can learn from in this area, innovations like intermediaries in the UK. I cannot imagine anything more important than ensuring safe pathways for victims of child abuse, IPV, to come forward and proceed through the criminal justice process. Our failure to create environments that can effectively hear their outcries and respond with safety can be devastating. Not only do we risk survivors being re-traumatized by our response or disbelieved by our systems, we are also empowering those who are engaging in the coercive abusive behaviors. A child or a person who makes an outcry of abuse that either recants out of fear or coercion is often more at risk. Offenders tell their victims they will not be believed. While we must always seek the truth, we must do everything we can to create the safest possible pathways for our vulnerable populations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you all for your opening remarks. At this point, we will now move to our first round of questions. We'll start with 6 minutes from Michelle Ferrari.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Thank you so much to the witnesses for being here today on our study of coercive control and the status of women committee. Many familiar faces here. Great to see some of you, and I know this is a very tough topic, and thank you to some of you who have been here before and also testifying again. Officer Deputy Chief Milanovic, I hope I'm saying that correct. Pretty shocking, the testimony you've provided here today with the 9,500 IPV calls, 26 incidents a day, a choking every single day for Peel Regional Police. How many of these women who are being choked, primarily women, how many of the people that are choking them, the men that are choking them, are out on bail?
Thank you for the question, and certainly in my opening remarks, one of the things that you would have noticed is bail and repeat offenders is an issue that continues to create some barriers for us as a police service to protect survivors of intimate partner violence and a variety of other offenses as well. It's not the only issue, but certainly it is one of those issues. And I think it not only creates some issues of confidence in survivors in coming forward, but also the police response. So without the exact numbers, I don't have those present. But what I can tell you is anecdotally, after having been involved in this for 25 years, one of the concerns that survivors that we've at least dealt with is that when ultimately they are released, how are they going to be kept safe? And unfortunately, it's a legitimate concern that we've seen play out tragically here in Peel. Darylyn Henderson Bellman being a great example of that.
Deputy Chief, to table to the committee, if you do have those numbers, I think it would be very valuable for us to have them on record for this study. I'm curious if you know or have numbers, and if you don't, if you could table them. How many violent repeat offenders? You're the third largest detachment in Canada. How many violent repeat offenders would be at large? I know you said of the 5 primary calls you have, number 3 was violating bail or release restrictions. How many would be at large where you don't know where they are?
That is a number, again, it would be large, and it would be, very difficult for us to collect that because people could attend courts in other jurisdictions, be released here in Peel. But, to help frame that up, we have a specialized unit that focuses almost exclusively on violent repeat offenders in possession of firearms involved in a variety of things, everything from human trafficking, drug trafficking, carjackings. And of that percentage that has been arrested by that unit, roughly half of them have already been released since their arrest, and that's in 2024. High risk violent offenders that we currently have in our region, it is approximately, I want to say, in around 790. But I can absolutely collect and confirm those numbers. And when I say high risk repeat offenders, those are offenders that are in our region alone have been released from the federal system.
Thank you so much for that data. It's just truly shocking. It's a public safety crisis at large, and I think if I can move to, Linda and Jeanne, I had the pleasure to meet these lovely women. They have a very powerful book, obviously very upsetting testimony that they provide. And one of the shocking things that they said to me was that parents are trafficking their children. Parents are torturing their children. And I think that is a very hard fact for a lot of us to comprehend or believe. But to Christy from Toba Centre, I had the privilege to to tour this incredible center. Everybody from across Canada should go visit what Christy has done. She is a remarkable human in what she has done. But Christy, how do we hold these parents accountable, to your point, when so many of the victims and children you see, it is in fact their parents or someone that they know? What are the best consequences in those instances when we know that parent reunification is often ideal, but these children are being abused and tortured?
Well, thanks for the question. And, I think we do know that the vast majority of abuse takes place by someone a child knows. So whether it's parent or somebody in their family or in their network of care, it's typically a person that the child trusts. And so I think, the centers like ours, and I'm not really speaking for our center here in Winnipeg, Manitoba specifically, but having access to these types of environments across our country where most kids don't have access, despite the fact that we have, great centers in most major cities, it's essential. I mean, our criminal justice system, and it's not a critique of the individuals within it, but it's not a friendly environment for kids to come forward. And so in order to provide kids the best chance to share with us what's going on so that we can uncover what's going on.
Christy, I'm so sorry. I know I only have 30 seconds, but I want you to tell them the setup you have there where those children are able to testify. I just want you to put that on the record, what I witnessed there. It was remarkable that they didn't have to go into the court and face their abuser, that you set up at the Toba Centre, if you can put that on the record.
Yeah, we have closed circuit testimony set up, as do Calgary and Edmonton. And one of the comments in my remarks was that it's an uphill battle to create precedent within each jurisdiction. But we do have the environment where kids can come back to the safe space where they can provide their testimony remotely and not have to enter into a courtroom with their abuser, returning to a center like ours where they provided their initial statement and have some sense of safety.
Thank you very much, Christy and Michelle. Next, Mark, you have 6 minutes.
Merci, Madame la Présidente, et merci vraiment, sincèrement, aux 6 témoins.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you sincerely to our 6 witnesses. You have already introduced some people here for other studies, but when we're talking about coercive behavior, it's really troubling. We have to find ways to look at the specific points that have been discussed here today. First question, Madame Fantaisie Renaud. First of all, I want to thank the Centre Horizon for the work that they've been doing at West Nipissing for the past several years. I went to visit the center, and I know how devoted you and your staff is for the community. But it's a little bit unique here because usually we have a lot of witnesses who come from large centers. They have a lot of resources available to them. So here, you not only offer services in French and English, but you have a large proportion of your clients who are from First Nations. So you are quite specific in your approach. Could you tell us about the challenges that you face when we talk about resources or lack of resources? For example, you're 4 hours from Toronto, Sudbury North Bay is quite far. What are the challenges that you have to try to help women as well as children with accommodation and given the lack of services? Thank you for your question and much appreciated. And I'm happy that you talk with compassion about our center. It is difficult for us coming from a small community because most of the services for our residents are usually in North Bay, which is still half an hour away. we have no services for them in West Nipissing. For children, where often we have a lack of therapists who speak French, so waiting lists are really long. And this is why we took advantage of our knowledge of people in the community, people who work in other agencies in order to offer services that families and kids need.
Services, our Indigenous community, we service at least 18% of our residents are from our local, from Sturgeon Falls, from our local reserve. We also have a few other reserves that are close to our town. They have so many disadvantages from being from a small town that we really need to look at all of the services that we could provide to them, either virtually or find another way to offer them to them, because they do have the right to all the services that someone from a big city has.
Dans le comité, ils ont entendu qu'il y avait un manque d'éducation.
In the committee here, we heard that there was a lack of education and training, not only for judges, but for everyone. Do you think that in a small center such as yours, that there is a need in terms of training and education in terms of professions? Absolutely. I'm going to speak English again.
C'est vraiment impératif que that any educational system, so in medical school, that they have almost a forced curriculum that they need to educate our future lawyers, our future police officers, anyone in the judicial system, what types of abuse there are and how these women and children have been affected and how the abusers are using this against them. So it's really important that we start education from when children are very young. We need school boards to have curriculums that are appropriate and that are designed by professionals that do work in violence against women to teach children from an early age about how good relationships are and about abuse, and for them to be able to not treat their partners.
Merci, Madame Lafantizier-Renault. Madame Gagnon.
Thank you, Madame Lafantizier-Renault. Madame Gagnon, you said you had a hard time with a definition. Do you have a definition for coercive behavior? And how do you think the federal government should play a role in terms of training? 40 seconds. Well, let me answer quickly. In terms of the definition, what is important is that it would be incorporated in the law. It's an exhaustive family violence, but we have to talk about the privation of freedom. Coercive control it's very important to add this to the law in an upcoming reform in terms of training, knowledge to enhance a definition would allow the judges to offer a limit for people who work with this law. So this would be added to the knowledge that is offered not only for courts, but also for lawyers, for them to be able to use them after that, but also to have compulsory training, as my colleague said. So it should be a knowledge that it is used in law, but it is well understood as well.
Next,
André,
vous avez 6 minutes.
André, you have 6 minutes.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to thank all of the witnesses for their contribution to this study. This study is so important and crucial.
Débuter mes premières questions.
I will begin with my first questions. with Madame Fortin from Jury Pop or with Madame Gagnon. One of the two of you could answer. First of all, I'd like to hear your opinion on, since you are from an organization based in Quebec, you probably are aware of this report to restore confidence, a transpartisan report. What do you think of these MPPs in Quebec who told me to talk to me about criminalization of coercive control? They said it's something that should be done federally. It's not something we can do here. It's up to you to work on this based on what we concluded in our report. What could you add on this? Have you had any discussions with MPPs in Quebec on this? Thank you for your question. We did not have exchanges in terms of criminalization with members of the Quebec Assembly, but it's kind of our intent today is to broaden the conversation and relatively that report so that the training of judges and other stakeholders help to end coercive control in Canada. Yes, because you mentioned it, the Act on Divorce has no mention of coercive control, so it has to be added to IPV. So the blind spot for you from the civil point of view is important. I would also say that based on your expertise in terms of coercive control, you mentioned initially that it must be done in parallel of our reflection on this inclusion, the matter of the inclusion of coercive control in the criminal code. I don't think we can think that with a magic wand we'll be able to solve everything, but we have to broaden things and we have to think about a continuum of services for the victims. We'll have to think in terms of cooperation from the civil point of view, from community groups. How do you see this continuum of services to meet the needs you have on the ground? I will provide a first answer. Perhaps my colleague will have a different answer. But the first stakeholder who testified in front of the House, she was giving examples of a lot of women who are victims of IPV and who will not complain to the police. So those people will not benefit from an upcoming reform of the criminal code. And we have examples also of victims of IPV for whom the reform could play against them because they could be accused of such a crime by the author of the crime. So we want the justice system to recognize the experience of those women, and we can get like safe orders in the courts. We turn to civil courts to get protective orders, which are the civil equivalent of 810. It's not a perfect tool, but it's a tool that we use to ensure the safety of the people we represent. I was mentioning that shared custody order can worsen the coercive control. So an exclusive custody order could end or lessen the coercive control, and how this is how family law can help. And my colleague Maître Fortin will explain how these instances can work among themselves. Let me give you a very concrete example, namely for people who will not turn to the criminal justice system. That's what we are witness at Jury Pop quite often. We have crisis teams who will meet because there will be an assessment that will be done, and we will identify an imminent danger and grave danger for kids to be murdered, and this is the from family law. These elements come after a separation and are a demonstration of coercive control, and they want measures that want to terrorize and isolate victims. So the various partners, the police, the crisis centers, the lawyers, all of these people who talk to each other, the common factor will have been the facts that were reported by the lawyer in family law, who will be able to stress these elements of coercive control.
You have 6 minutes as well.
Thank you, and thank you so much to all the witnesses today. My first question is actually for Madame Halius. You spoke about the importance of you said you supported coercive control, the idea of criminalizing, but it needed to be implemented through an anti-oppressive, trauma-informed, and intersectional lens. And this is something I've often pushed for in committee. You spoke specifically about Indigenous and Black women. Really important when you look at stats, Indigenous and racialized women experience the highest rates of violence in the country. But you said something, you said that often in the cases, the problem with coercive control is that Indigenous and Black women are often accused of being the aggressors in those situations. Can you expand on that?
Yes, thank you so much for this important question. Probably to start, I can give you some statistics. According to Stat Canada, which is conducted in 2020, the General Society of Survey on Social Identity, 1 in 5, which is 21% of Black and 22% of Indigenous people have little or no confidence in police. So this is a statistics we need to keep in our mind. So as I said, before we criminalize coercive control, we need to make sure that our justice system is equitable for Black Indigenous community, because we learned it from Australia. Actually, I already mentioned in my statement, it also perpetuates Indigenous women because of lack of the trust in our police system. So that's why I try to explain, because victims, especially racialized victims, there is also a study which explores gender-based violence, which specialize in the court and racial minority women. It shows that the justice system is already unresponsive, and many racialized Black Indigenous victims are re-victimized during the court proceeding and facing discrimination. Some of the services are culturally insensitive, which is affecting women to stress the system. So we support coercive control must be, because it's part of economic abuse, it must be criminalized, but we want to make sure that our justice system is service for women and, gender diverse folks, especially for BIPOC.
So if I understand this correctly, what you're saying is that because of systemic racism or ongoing systemic racism, we certainly know that through the Red Dress study, that it's to put in place criminalizing coercive control is premature before we deal with issues of systemic racism, particularly because the majority of victims of violence come from Indigenous and Black backgrounds. Is that right? Yes.
Correct.
Okay. You also spoke about 95% of the victims of coercive control. A big part is financial abuse, right? Not allowing access to bank accounts, financial abuse. I put forward a bill for a guaranteed livable basic income. One of the reasons I put it forward was in response to the national inquiry, because we know there's a direct correlation between intimate partner violence, gender-based violence, and economic abuse, or not having access to proper economic resources. Unfortunately, it was voted down. why is providing, and I know that you're quite supportive of guaranteed livable basic income, why is providing a guaranteed livable basic income critical in truly addressing one of the root causes of coercive control?
Yes. So as you know, the abuser best friend is isolation. So coercive control also, it isolates victim to make financially dependent. So victim, she cannot live, she don't have like a power to even access the social services. So when we advocate, the most important thing is empowering economically women. It may be from livable income, or it may be also creating a job opportunity for a victim is very critical, not only to empower, but to break the cycle of coercive control. So I personally support women should have a livable income in any ways, because that break the cycles of coercive control and that break also cycles of isolation.
Thank you so much, because I have a deep concern about this, because we also have witnesses, Linda McDonald, you indicated at the beginning of this session that Nova Scotia has declared gender-based violence as an epidemic. I know that there's multiple cities across the country who have also declared gender-based violence as an epidemic, yet it seems that we're not really at a place where we are willing to take the actions necessary to deal with it. Do you think that we currently need to look at systems that are in place to ensure that we are creating a society that does protect women and gender diverse people from violence?
Yes, but I think women and girls deserve much more respect than we're getting. I think a lot of what we're saying is not new. I think that there's for every reason, there's still a lack of political will on all parties, I think, to really take the seriousness of the misogyny and the patriarchy in our culture. So I know education is important, educating children and changing the structures, but if we're all still working in a misogynistic judicial system or political system or healthcare system, we're still all walking around as victims that are trying to heal. And coercive control is really difficult. Yeah.
Thank you, Ms. McDonald. At this point, we will be starting our second round. Dominique, you have 5 minutes.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente. Encore une fois.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Once again, this study really is terrifying. Thank you very much for the witnesses today, especially those who shared very painful experiences. I will ask Madame Eleyesus, I hope I'm pronouncing your last name correctly. For economic violence, victims of economic violence, could you describe for us a typical victim of economic control, of economic violence? In fact, my question is, are those women who are really less able financially to function normally, or are we talking about professional women? What's your typical victim?
Sorry, just my mic was a little bit cut off, so if you could repeat the question, just in short.
Alors, ma question est très simple.
My question is very simple. What is the example of what's the typical example of a victim of economic violence? Are those victims who are less wealthy, or maybe it's men or women who earn their living well, but who live from financial violence?
Yes, so when we say economic abuse is a very hidden form. which is under-recorded, under-reported form of violence, which experienced by 95% of victims of gender-based violence. So there are three types of economic abuse, which is economic control, when abuser control women expense, women budget, women, her entire life. There is a coercive control. So the second part of economic abuse is economic exploitation. Usually, this is for a woman who make an income. So abuser, he take advantage and destroy her economy. It may be like stealing her bank account. It may be also using her credit card. There is a coerced date. And it may be also taking a lot of financial on behalf of her. There's also fraud. It may be tax fraud, just to name it. And the other one is employment sabotage. So restricting women not to go back to the workforce. It may be like hiding her car key, denying her not to buy, basic necessities, for example, medication, transportation, telecommunication, which are economic resource. So when you see the cycles of economic abuse, number one, victim is isolated because of coercive control. Number two, victims she don't have the idea, even knowledge about her financial right. Number three, victims, usually they don't have resources. For example, telecommunication, because their credit may be destroyed. Number four, women, they will not have the right to access their bank account.
Merci. Merci beaucoup. Madame Gagnon, merci d'être là. Madame Justine.
Ms. Gagnon, thank you for being there. And Justine as well, thank you for joining us today. Do we agree on a definition of coercive control? We have discussed that earlier. It was raised, the difficulty of really clearly defining it so that everyone knows exactly what we're talking about. That is a question that I would like you to answer. And I would also like us to look at the training of judges, because I believe that there's something to be dealt with there. So perhaps when it comes to the clearest possible definition, if we can certainly try to and tie it in with what the panelists just before us mentioned as examples of coercive control. There are really three stages. You have the issue of depriving someone of freedom, of all the freedoms that one might think of. There is micro-regulation of the day-to-day life, attacking all the little actions on a day-to-day basis of a person, whether it's their food, the color of their clothing, what type of shampoo they use for their hair, or where they travel to and from, following them. And the third aspect would be the types of behavior of any form of violence, up to and including physical violence. We'll talk about a pattern of behavior and strategies that are used to isolate, to control, and to cause fear. And bit by bit, this adds up to the image of a cage that closes in on the person, that causes the person to be so controlled that the victim can no longer even realize that he or she is subject to that pattern of behavior. I've just been told that I'm out of time. Thank you.
I would like to welcome Anita. You have 5 minutes.
And there's such a wonderful panel with so much information. I wish I could ask you all questions, but I really do want to focus in on the financial and economic abuse. So, Messi Heliesus, I think I will be directing most of my questions to you, and if there's time, I'll go to some of the others. And I know that the Canadian Centre for Women's Empowerment is really avant-garde. It was the first centre in Canada to even get statistics and research about financial or economic abuse. And one of the things that you've testified before this committee before, and in this context I think is very relevant, is that often women who are suffering from financial or economic abuse are not self-aware that this is a form of abuse and that it's happening to them, sometimes until many years later. And I think we've seen this similar thing with coercive control, where because it's not defined, because it's not publicly visible, if someone hits you, you know that's abuse. But coercive control and financial abuse, how do you get around that, especially when we're looking at criminal code, when we're looking at, formalizing things, when you have people who are suffering from this who might not even realize it themselves?
Yeah, so thank you so much. I think that's why we're asking to have a national day. Having the national day, it really helps for us to raise awareness. So what we have seen is, sadly, our victims, they don't even know if they are experiencing economic and financial abuse, because finance is a taboo, especially in racialized culture. Domestic abuse also, it's a taboo. There is a power and a control. So abuser usually, as a tactic, they take that power to isolate and to control them. So that's why I just also mentioned to have a national day. So yeah, victims, they don't have understanding well, even service providers sometimes, according to our statistics. So yeah, it's very tricky. So this is a huge opportunity for abuser, again, to perpetuate and to control either financially. But once the victim move out, they experience the impact of economic and financial abuse. And plus, as you know, the system is not designed to protect victims. Again, that's another systemic violence for racialized victims. So I think in terms of legal proceeding, awareness is the most important thing to teach women. When we teach, we need to make sure that it should be inclusive, it should be trauma-informed and cultural sensitive, because talking about economy, talking about finance is a very subject matter which related to trauma. So that's why my organization right now, we have a trauma-informed, it's called a trauma of money approach to empower women, because it's very triggering even to speak about that. And then the other thing is we need to conduct more research on coercive control. So that would be a very good, segue to mitigate the impact of, financial and even economic abuse.
More research and
Yes.
more awareness.
Yeah, but the research must be aggregated data. Sadly, we don't have a lot of data. So we want to know how many Indigenous people are impacted by financial abuse and Black racialized. This is very important. I know I was also asked, I didn't answer that question, but it affects everyone, this form of violence, with regardless of culture, race and identity. But we knew that Black Indigenous people, even gender diverse folks, they are highly risk because of the colonization and the history of what we have in the past.
Thank you. Very good recommendations. You also mentioned in your testimony today, because one of the things we're struggling with in this study is whether or not this needs to be in the criminal code, and if so, in what way. And when you spoke about that, I mean, we've heard already that you mentioned that it has to be trauma-informed if it is an offense, but then you said something about you need to see systemic change first. So what would be the precursors? What would be the things that you think need to be in place before we criminalize?
That's a good question. We know about CARA law, so that really helps us to teach, and educate our lawyers. So education is the most important thing, not only for survivors, for people who are on the justice system. That's the most important and fundamental system change what we have. And the second system change is, of course, access to justice must be very simple. And the relationship between racialized people and the police or the justice system has to be also, smoothened. So these are the preconditions we are asking, the government before we move to criminalize coercive control.
One of the things that we've also seen about women who stay in these abusive relationships or go back to them, you just said that financial abuse is probably the number one. Is that the case? And how does that impact with coercive control in 10 seconds?
Yes. Yeah. So when a woman experiences domestic violence from our consultation, they don't talk to police even right away because of many reasons. They don't talk to neighbors. They don't talk to family members because of the shame, the trauma, and the guilt. What we learn is right away, most of them, they go to the bank and they have to make sure that they have enough money to leave that relationship. Unfortunately, our system is broken in the financial sector. And of course, the service is not integrated. So women, she prefers to stay at home because of, this is a situation what we are dealing. So we have seen that financial reason is one of the reasons women, they go back to with abusers.
Okay, excellent. Adrienne, you have 2.5 minutes.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. I see that in view of the time, some of the witnesses have left us, but I will nevertheless ask my next question. I see that Ms. Fortin of Jury Pop is still there. In my first round, we explained the blind spot in the civil aspects concerning this concept of coercive control. Under the Divorce Act, you have understood or explained the effects on families regarding that blind spot in our reflective process. But there's a recommendation that I would like to deal with, and our colleague, that was one of her questions. I know that you didn't have time to answer, but it was also a question I wanted to ask briefly regarding judges training in your recommendations. So if you would like to take the time to say a little bit more about whether that could change things concretely in our reflection on coercive control. Thank you. And in fact, Matt Gagnon, my colleague, had to leave at 6:30 p.m., unfortunately, and asked me to pass on his apologies. Concerning the training, as regarding legislation on a concept such as coercive control or domestic violence in the Divorce Act, to provide a definition, to set limits, if the person who has to apply those limits understand the concepts that they cover, and especially understand the impact, particularly if you consider the Divorce Act and the impact on a child. And you absolutely have to make sure that those people receive adequate training. We're talking about judges and other professionals that work with victims and are dealing with violence, including the children. Unfortunately, what we are observing before the courts in Quebec is the lack of knowledge between what the law is, the concepts that must be taken into account, that are mandatory to take into account in family violence when you make a decision that has to do with the best interest of the child, but not being able to apply that or to have a judgment or a decision that has the reasoning that truly takes that into account. That's what we see. There will be allegations of family violence, and as a lawyer, we can plead violence and plead the consequences on the children, and to demonstrate the behavior and depriving someone of freedom, but the orders that are given don't really echo that, in our opinion. That's where the training would have to be essential and enable the person who makes the decisions that has a major impact on the victims and the victim survivors, because a decision of a court, especially for custody of a child, it is major and has a long-term impact, and it will affect all aspects of the victim's life, whether it's their physical and emotional safety and also the whole economic side. And at the moment, there is a certain distance between the progress we have in the legislation and what we as jurists can do to advocate for the victims.
Thank you so much. Next, Leah Gazan, you have 2.5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Chair. I have a question for Madame La Fantasie. Is that right? La Fantasie. Sorry. I hope I didn't destroy your name. But you spoke about in the shelter, you see all sorts of trauma, but you also spoke about the trauma experienced by children at the shelter coming in who are often abusive with the mother, just from modeling by the abusive parent. What kind of wraparound supports? Often when we talk about shelters, we talk about the victim, the first victim, but we often fail to analyze it as like a family model. What kind of wraparound supports are required for children that are demonstrating impacts or vicarious impacts from the abuse of a parent?
Well, I do know that in our district that we do have the Child Witness Program, and our shelter offers it in French to children. It's an extremely well-designed program for children, and the mothers also attend, but they are different. They're in different locations. So that is one of the positive things that we do have for children. But the waiting list for children counseling and trauma counseling is so long in our region. It's currently almost not available in their native language. So that is another big concern. We need to give funding. We need to give funding to these agencies to be able to provide
Thank you. Underfunding is certainly a theme of gender-based violence. Again, a demonstration of lack of political will. And Madame Halizus, we spoke before, and one of the areas where there's a critical lack of funding is for Black organizations, particularly Black organizations that work in the area of violence. Again, another demonstration of lack of political will to deal with this crisis head on. Can you expand on that a little bit more for us?
Yeah, so, okay. There is a report that was released in 2021, I believe. I'm not sure the exact time, but it's the middle of pandemic. You can check it. It's an unfunded report by the Black Foundation. It shows that less than only 1% of Black-led organizations funded by the foundation. So this is a statistics what we have. So hopefully, I hope.
So just a comment. I want to end just by saying we have the highest rate of violence, Black and Indigenous women, yet Black women get less than 1% of the funding.
Yes,
is that
that's
correct?
the statistics. Yes,
Okay,
yeah.
thank you.
Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you. Michelle, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you so much. It's so hard to fit this all in because there's so many witnesses with so much great things to say when we're talking about what we need to do better in terms of preventing coercive control. I would ask if everyone's okay with it or comfortable, could you table to the committee what you believe the definition of coercive control to be? I think that's going to be one of the key things out of this study is what does that look like to you? What is coercive control to you? The next question I would ask, if I can have
I'm just going to interrupt you for 1 minute, Michelle. What she means by tabling is to, for those of you that are not familiar, to submit a written report to the clerk.
Thank you. Yeah, email. Sorry, I should have said that. I've been here. I've been in this place too long now. The second thing, if I can just get a show of hands, how many of you would like to see coercive control criminalized? Just a show of hands. So I see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And Christy, you do not have your hand up. Okay. So, and I didn't see, did we lose, Officer, Deputy Chief, did you put your hand up as well? You did. Okay. Okay, Christy, I'm going to try to come back to you to see what that is, or maybe you can put it later. But I'd like to go to the Deputy Chief again, if I can. When we look at prevention, because I think that's a big piece of this, and especially when you talked about the calls, the 26 incidents a day. My local police chief showed me on a board the calls that he was getting of repeat calls to certain addresses. It was confidential information. But one of the things I said, why is a 10-year-old on your repeat call list? He said, because that's a child that was in the home during a domestic call, during an intimate partner violence call. I can see the deputy shaking his head. What training are you getting for intimate partner violence? Because I spoke with a parole officer last night who said they aren't getting any training.
Well, thank you for the question. And again, just to clarify, yeah, absolutely. I would love to see coercive control as part of the criminal code, but as a tool and probably a broader assessment of where the gaps are. Because without that, I don't see that it will have the desired impact. Specific to the training that we've developed is trauma-informed and really done in partnership with our community partners. We have here a unique model, one of the largest centralized off-site intimate partner violence units in the country. And it consists of 24 different partners, all of whom, they're experts in this space. They're providers that have identified the type of training that they feel that our police officers should have. Like traditionally policing does the approach of a very proprietary approach where we try to tell the community what we think is best and how services should be delivered. We've moved away from that here in Peel, and we rely heavily on our partners to help develop that training, identify training that we should be participating in, and work on really it's an opportunity for the community to provide those perspectives. So, we have, and I'll give you an example. Again, I want to go back to the unit because I do think it's important. The imagery of a police officer who's dressed like me in Peel, responding to and case managing a call, it doesn't exist in Peel. we have people, we have, I believe now, almost 20 languages represented in our intimate partner violence unit who work with service providers. We have a variety, we have a tremendous amount of diversity in that unit. In fact, it's one of our most diverse units that we have responding to the community in their need. And, we even have survivors of intimate partner violence who have had their own experiences. And I really think that is one of the crucial things. You need an advocate who understands, is interested, and is engaged, and is willing to defend our survivors out in the community. And so for, training, we have endless number of pieces.
Okay,
and I don't want to
thank
take
you.
up too much time. But
Thank you. I appreciate it. I think what I brought up, when I brought up the 10-year-old, I think what I was trying to get at too was the long-term impact and the prevention end. If that's where children are growing up watching this IPV or are a part of these multiple calls, the likelihood of them to go on and have unhealthy relationships is critical. I'm going to try to get in these 2 questions in my short amount of time. To Mercit, I think I've said that wrong. I would love to see or hear your recommendations on financial literacy for kids in high school, because so many of them don't know any different when they're in a coercive control, financial control situation. But if it's implemented throughout the education system, understanding financial autonomy, I think could be very beneficial. To Christy, how do you help those children who have been so exposed to IPV to break those patterns of unhealthy relationships? And I'm pretty sure we're probably out of time.
In about 25, 30 seconds, if you could wrap up, one of you. Okay, Christy?
These are difficult things, and I want to clarify, I didn't put up my hand not because I'm opposed to criminalizing coercive behavior, but more so because I hesitate to put too much weight into sort of criminalizing more behaviors when we're not yet equipped, I don't believe, to effectively respond to the criminal code violations we have already. And so, to your point, Michelle, the kids that we see coming in who are witnesses to violence, to witnesses to their parents being assaulted, if you talk to our forensic interviewers, they will tell you they are the toughest interviews, and they listen to kids talk about significant harms they've faced themselves, but it actually, it shakes children to their absolute core and takes away their sense of safety to watch their parent be harmed. So I think finding ways for us to more effectively respond to the crimes that we have there, and using prevention and other things, as well as, criminalizing when we perhaps, start getting ahead of effective responses for kids.
Great, thank you. Emanuela, you have about 5 minutes and then some.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to all of our witnesses for being here with us today. Toba Center for Children and Youth. I'm sorry, I don't know how to pronounce your last name, so that's what I'm going to call you for now. You spoke about creating safe pathways for victims to come forward. Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering if you can speak to us a little bit more about some of the barriers that currently exist, and perhaps specify changes that you would recommend for us to make so that these barriers were no longer in place.
Thanks very much for the question. And I think, I'm speaking specifically from the lens of a child advocacy center, which do exist in most major cities across this country, but also for, the sexual assault centers and survivor centers that exist for adults who experience this. These types of environments are being created to create those soft landings, to be inclusive of our criminal justice partners, law enforcement, child protection, all of those, really critical responses that we're all very invested in. I think we all want to see criminal justice happen successfully when it needs to happen and see offenders prosecuted. But our types of environments create pathways where kids can come forward, where vulnerable people can come forward and feel safe to walk through the doors and not necessarily enter a police station or have to make a report, go to a hospital and sit in a waiting room there and be triaged through several people, but come into a space where they're supported by victim advocates from the very beginning of report and throughout that journey, so that we can pursue justice and hopefully see some success, but with or without that successful prosecution, we have the support that's ongoing. So environments like ours, I think, are critical. I think creating more environments like this across Canada is critical for young people and adults. And I mean, that's what I mean by safer pathways. A lot of our communities, our First Nations communities, our newcomer populations have had very negative experience, not just in Canada with some of these systems, but from countries of origin as well. And so, embedding those responses where they become critical, but wrapping those in a community care environment, and acknowledging that systemic sort of racism and experiences they may have had in the past. It's ironic when we need professionals like law enforcement to help, and most of the folks working in these specific spaces are phenomenal human beings, but that doesn't change the negative experiences someone may have. And so when you've experienced that type of negativity, and then those are the very people you rely upon in your time of need, we need to change that pathway.
Thank you. And I think we are a little bit, there's a lot of work to be done before criminalizing it, although that's up to the, obviously the government, and we don't know what we're going to be recommending yet. But but for sure there will be, talk about legislating, or at least bringing forward legislation that surrounds coercive control. What type of language would you recommend we use? Because a lot of the witnesses we've heard from speak a lot about intimate partner violence and coercive control. But a lot of the witnesses here today spoke a lot about children and how they often experience coercive control as well. And I know that it's a little bit more difficult because children are the dependents of their parents. And so they depend financially on them. And there's a lot of, stuff that we have to be careful of. But what would you recommend there? Would you say family violence? Would you say intimate partner violence? Like what types of language would you use around that?
I mean, for us, interpersonal violence, it captures it very well, right? It captures it for children, for youth, for intimate partner. But interpersonal violence in all these family relationships or romantic relationships or otherwise is fairly inclusive of those.
If any other witness has a comment on that. No? Are any of you aware of any other countries who have criminalized coercive control?
So, sorry, just a little bit.
Any other countries that have criminalized coercive control?
So the Australian, they tried, of course, it's already, I think, passed, but I also mentioned in my statement, in the past, because of the racial inequality and discrimination, it was affected, our Aboriginal society. So I can, raise Australia maybe, yeah.
Scotland has coercive control as a law, criminal law.
Okay. So I guess we'll look further into that rather than asking specifically. Yeah. Unless you have some, I think it's too big of a question right now to ask. But if you have any information that you would like to table to the committee, you all know the definition at this point, please feel free to do so. Thank you all.
Okay, thank you. So at this point, we have finished the second round. We did gavel in at 7:19. So in order to go into our committee business, I'd like to start around 7:03 or 7:04. That being said, we do have a window of about 5 or 6 minutes. We will not get through an entire round. Would you like to stop there and excuse our witnesses and just go right into committee business, or is it the will of the committee to commence a third round and get? I think I'm seeing that we're just going to, we've had a tremendous amount of testimony at this point. Unless I'm seeing or hearing otherwise, we will excuse our witnesses. Thank you so much for your testimony today. We certainly appreciate it. So we'll just wait a few minutes and we will go into closed session.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.